I'd like to introduce Deborah Doe, who is the Director of the World Development Movement.
Hello. How is everyone today? A bit rushed. I'll try and be brief. I was gonna stand, but I think I want to sit, because if I stand, I won't be able to see that dinosaur over there. It's a dragon. Sorry, it's a dragon. Apparently, my eyesight. I'll blame it on that. The question that we were asked to address: Rio to Rio, 20 wasted years. What went wrong and what went right? I think that the things that were raised at the beginning, some of the great things that did come out of Rio were fantastic. The local Agenda 21, which actually didn't take off that much here, but it did a lot of things around the world and communities. I still hear communities around the world referring to local Agenda 21 and what that achieved. The UNFCCC, the UN Convention on Biodiversity, the precautionary principle. That was one of the things back then. We thought, well, it doesn't really matter if we don't have scientific certainty. Let's be sure. Now that thing seems to have flipped over. The other good thing that came out of Rio was the common but differentiated responsibility. That was a very important principle that many are still fighting today. That basically said that we in rich Western nations have an increased burden to pay over those in developing countries, and we have a responsibility to pay and protect. 10 years ago, there was a follow-up summit in Johannesburg. So I wasn't there 20 years ago, but I was there 10 years ago. I was in Joburg. And since then, I think things took a turn for the worse. By that point, sustainable development had been very much captured by the corporate sector. I think so that the Rio summit that had really started to further the principles that came out of the Brundtland report in '87 started to slip away from us, I think, by 2002. And, that was typified by the fact that, we as civil society, I was there as civil society, if you wanted to have this lovely meeting with the Prime Minister, you needed to pay $1,000 to do so. And all of the businesses, of course, did that. If, this main square in the middle of Rio, I wish I had slides here, but I don't, were basically corporatized. There was no public space available. Companies had taken over. And the main outcome of 10 years ago was these things called Type 2 partnership agreements, which were voluntary agreements that let Monsanto solve malaria with a GM mosquito. Not about dealing with climate change. Now we have the green economy, which is the new sort of big idea, supposedly. And I've long been an advocate for the green economy. I used to work with a former hat on in a group that was really promoting the idea of a green economy. And it's not about, what's happening again is this, what we're seeing furthered is a corporate-led green economy. There are two types of green economy, one that serves and one that masters. And of course, the one that's being promoted at Rio is the latter. The real green economy, I'll start with what a real green economy is. It's a fundamental re-engineering of the economy. It is a big idea, or it should be a big idea, based on respect for environmental limits and prioritizing social goals. The world, it would include possibly no-growth strategies in certain countries. A no-growth strategy looks at how do we provide for people's needs. It's not about growth serving its own ends. Or a low-growth and in some cases a degrowth strategy. It would really look at equity of the Earth's natural resources. It might mean a complete change and overhaul in our consumption and production patterns. It would include tax reforms, green jobs, public investment and procurement, and most importantly, regulation. Markets need rules. Unfortunately, what we have now is everything is about the market. The market is the only mechanism that our politicians seem to have. And when we say there's no great ideas coming out of Rio, there are great ideas. They're just not coming from our politicians, unfortunately. I think their social movements are bringing forward a lot of really exciting ideas. The green economy in Rio is trying to put a price on everything. And I think the intentions of this were good. Economists, I always used to talk about internalizing your externalities. So how do you pay for the stuff that you use? If you put a price on it, you might lose less. Although if you take that to the logical conclusion, if you put a price on everything, it's always for sale to the highest bidder, isn't it? So, the worst case scenario could see lakes and lake districts paved over. We're already seeing our forests being cut down, even those that are involved in some sort of pricing mechanism, which I'll talk about. It's not about, what we're seeing is the commodification of nature, the marketisation of everything. That's one of the big debates in Rio. What's interesting is that it's being facilitated by the global economic downturn, unfortunately. So the drive that we need to create green markets as a way to achieve sustainable development. So what this will mean is that we're actually putting more nature under the control of financial markets, financial institutions, and it will be at their mercy for what happens. So it locks our commons, the global commons, which is our air, our water, and so on, our forests. It will lock our global commons into the mercy of financial markets. It locks them into private control and makes the task of reclaiming them harder. It is already happening. I mentioned carbon markets. They fail to curb emissions. Food speculation. I just did a talk earlier on what's happening with food commodities and how everything is now up for sale. It's no longer something about human need. It's about financial markets making money. REDD, which was a UN mechanism, REDD, which is it was allegedly to protect forests, has actually opened up the door for land grabbing and increased deforestation. One example in Uganda, we saw over 22,000 people evicted from their land at gunpoint to allow a UK firm, the New Forests Company, to plant trees in order to earn carbon credits. And many people are being sold pension and other investments to think this is a good thing. If you see the New Forest Company brochure across your door, do not be fooled. With this approach developed, called the TEEB approach, the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, basically there would be a forests and rivers which are considered natural capital are being valued, and this would result in biodiversity banks. And in theory, it only pays out if you protect things. But if you're seeing what happens with hedge funds now, they can bet on anything. I used to do a presentation with a great graphic from a Financial Times headline that said, "Hedge funds burned by lack of hurricanes." Financial markets are very clever at betting on anything. So they will be betting on it going extinct. They'll be shorting and longing and all of those things that financial markets do if we have these biodiversity banks. It's about to happen in other commodities as well. The head of Citigroup talked about water, and he said, I expect to see a globally integrated market for fresh water within 25 years. So we're already having our water systems privatized. In somewhere like Georgia, in Tbilisi, Georgia, water prices went up by 260% when the water systems were privatized. And this is not an unusual figure. This is about taking it to the next step, which is about trading water commodities. I'm Canadian, and I know from a colleague of mine that Canada's, the melting of the polar ice caps, there's only 50,000 or so Indigenous people in the Canadian Arctic. Who cares? They're seeing it as the next oil, the next global commodity. They'll build a pipeline and ship water down to the U.S. And if you've seen, Vicky Hurd, who was in the last session, had a great graph that showed the U.S. is going to have extreme drought conditions. They'll be needing Canada's polar ice caps for water. And that's one of the things that's happening. I won't talk about food speculation because I did that in the last session. It is something that WGM is campaigning on, and there is a way to stop it through European regulation, which you can do. How can we combat this trend? So that's the doom and gloom. How do we combat it? Well, actually, yesterday at Rio, I was pleased to hear that the G77 has walked out of the talks around the green economy. Social movements are providing alternatives. Food sovereignty, energy sovereignty, and that's saying local is more important. It's not about corporate control of our local resources, and they're sending ways and talking about ways and developing ways to protect our common resources. So there are ideas, it's just who we're listening to out there. And what's very interesting, people say, oh, you can't do that, it's unrealistic. Well, Denmark just brought in regulation for energy sovereignty that said we're going to have local energy sources, low carbon energy sources. these things are ultimately possible, and I hate it when people call me, or WDM, or any of the people on this panel, I suspect, radical, because these ideas should not be radical. What's radical is our privatization of nature. The things you can do, you can write to your MP. I've got some action cards here. Some of them made them around. I have a briefing on the green economy. If there's not enough, you can download them from our website. And you can join the movements that are promoting alternatives, from WDM, Friends of the Earth, Transition Town Movement, and so on. So I'll leave it at that.
Deborah, thank you very much.